I'm going to talk tonight about this building here that you see on the screen, Francis M. Maguire Hall. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Woodmere, just by way of introduction, so that it's possible to understand how momentous this transformation is for the institution. And I'll be talking about, how it is that a museum goes about creating a new, part of itself. So how do we think about what we do, and what was the opportunity that led us to take on this project, and what's involved in transforming something that was built as a residence in the 19th century and making that into a public museum in 2025. And this is a journey with Maguire Hall that Woodmere began in 2021, in the spring of 2021. We're looking forward to having our certificate of occupancy this coming June, and we'll be looking at an opening date in the fall. So, we're kind of right in the thick of it, and things are happening fast and furious. As you'll see, I'm going to show some slides of what's going on right now. But it's an incredibly exciting time for Woodmere, and I'm just so happy to be with you tonight. So, a little bit of history. Woodmere was founded in the 1890s, or I shouldn't say, well, Woodmere was founded in the 1890s by this fellow, Charles Knox Smith, who was a city leader. He was a member of the Common Council, which is what city council used to be called. And he had made a fortune. He became a wealthy man, a self-made person, by the way, who owned metal mines in Mexico, mostly silver, and his clients were silverware companies and jewelry makers and things like that. But he sold silver ore and other metals for all kinds of manufacturing and fabrication. And his thing was art. He was a great art collector, and he wanted to create a museum of the fine arts in Philadelphia. And you have to put yourself in sort of the mindset of 1890s Philadelphia. The Philadelphia Museum of Art was a museum of the applied arts and a school, the Museum and School for Industrial Arts, Memorial Hall in Fairmount Park. It was not a fine art museum. It was an applied art museum dedicated to inspiring the industries of the city to make beautiful objects, all kinds of ceramics, glassware, wallpaper, fabrics and textiles. I mean, that was really the focus of the Philadelphia Museum of Art in these years, not, fine art, which in those days was, fine painting, sculpture. I mean, there was a very, perhaps more narrow definition of what art meant. PAFA, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, was a school with an annual show, but the exhibiting of art at PAFA was part of the curricular program of the Academy. And Barnes was, barely born. Well, Barnes was born in the at this time, but the Barnes Foundation Museum in Lower Merion didn't exist yet. And I'm showing, this first view of Woodmere from a drone. Nowadays you can go to Target and buy a drone and make a photograph like this. You just send it up, and you see Woodmere in the foreground. Its tower, which is an identifying element that you can see going up and down Germantown Avenue. And there's Chestnut Hill College in the distance. In the middle ground, that's the Rose Garden at the Arboretum right there. And then just beyond it, Erdenheim Farm. And then, the beautiful ridge of, of White Marsh up in the distance at the horizon. Charles Knox Smith's vision for creating Woodmere was to create an experience of art and nature together. He lived downtown. He had a big art collection. He probably could have bought a square block of Philadelphia if he wanted to, but he decided that he wanted to build his museum in Chestnut Hill because he wanted to create an experience of art and nature together. He wanted all of this green stuff to be the experience that brought people to the art. He believed that art and nature together were a path to God, and he was thinking about creating a museum, Woodmere, with his foundation at the center of it, that people who lived in the kind of gritty, industrial, dirty city would come to, and it would lift their souls up. And so that's really the beginning of the concept of Woodmere. The estate already existed. It had been a country house for a Philadelphia family. Charles Knox Smith bought it in the 1890s. He expanded it and made the big Cook and Del Bueno gallery, the big rotunda-shaped gallery that we have for exhibitions and programs. And the provisions of his will were that on his death and his wife's death, the collection and endowment that he assembled would, become the foundation of, he had operated Woodmere as a private museum starting in 1910, but after his death, he wanted it to become a charitable organization, 501c3, and, function as a public museum, as a public charity museum. So that's the history of Woodmere. We fast forward, we're in the middle of the pandemic. I've been the director of Woodmere at that point for 10 or 11 years. I started as the director of Woodmere in 2010. And in April of 2021, I got a call from my friends at the Chestnut Hill Conservancy. Did I hear that the Sisters of St. Joseph were planning to sell their convent? And not only that, but they were already talking to developers because this convent was sitting on 4 acres of prime land and right at the middle of Chestnut Hill. And was there anything I could possibly do? I just kind of scratched my head and thought about it for a minute and said, well, let me get over there. And so I walked over, and this is a photograph that I took in those very years. I can't say that this is from April 2021, but this is a summer 2020, late spring into summer 2021 photograph of Maguire, of what was then St. Michael's Hall. The Sisters of St. Joseph had resided in the building from 1923, and in 1921, they made the determination that the building was more than they could handle. Their numbers have dwindled. The Sisters of St. Joseph, you may know, run Chestnut Hill College, and they run the Norwood Fontbonne, and there are parts of the order all across the United States, but their numbers are fewer than they once were, and they decided they were going to sell St. Michael's Hall and sell St. Mary's by the Sea, which some of you may know in Cape May, a beautiful, beautiful Victorian house right at the tip of Cape May, which happily enough has become an oceanic institute of some kind. And so happily enough, both of their big buildings have, found good institutional futures. In case you're not very familiar with the area, on the top of the screen, with a yellow line around it, is Woodmere's main building. 70 steps away down Germantown Avenue is Woodmere's new Maguire Hall. And, there are those little footprints that I had to walk over to check out the building. It's 70 steps away. Interestingly enough, the property actually once extended all the way over to Bells Mill Road. But just before the sisters acquired the property, that little strip in between was sold, and 6 houses were built there, 2, 2, and 2. And so now we're separated by this little strip of a street that's bounded by Hampton. So the property that we're talking about tonight, what we now call Maguire Hall, is this rectangle that you see in the lower part of the screen, 4 acres of open green space. Woodmere's main campus, what we call Charles Knox Smith Hall, on the top of the screen is 6 acres. And of course, presented with this opportunity, we, the staff, the board, the community at Woodmere, what is it that we would do with a 17,000 square foot building on 4 acres of land? And of course, where I started this was with Woodmere's mission. Woodmere is a museum dedicated to the arts of Philadelphia, and we have one of the very great collections of American art, but most people don't know that because we have very few galleries in which to show our collection. Like most museums, the majority of our collection is in storage, but aside from galleries dedicated to our founders' collection, our beautiful 19th century landscapes that many of you may know, we really don't have permanent collection galleries to speak of. And always in my mind, this was something that was holding Woodmere back, simply because people don't understand the depth, the strength, and the interesting qualities of the collection itself. So, my first thought went to, we can make galleries. And we started there, and not just galleries. If you know Woodmere, you know that we do a lot with our outdoor space. We have beautiful outdoor sculptures and a rock road and a whole nature experience that integrates sculpture, ecology, nature, stewardship of the land. And so the idea of 4 more acres was like, 4 more acres for art and sculpture. And then it quickly grew, the vision for what would we do with this building and what would the opportunity present in terms of the growth of Woodmere's capacity. Museums nowadays, Woodmere, but most museums that function as education as education institutions. Museums are about opening the mind, using art as a platform to do that. And so one of the things we always needed was a children's art studio. We have a painting studio for adults in the old carriage house at Charles Knox Smith Hall. But it's really hard to kind of mix children and adults in an art studio. Even, a class ends and then an hour later you have another class starting and it's adults versus kids. Adults use turpentine, they use oil paint, they use palette knives, razor blades, all that stuff. Children use, finger paint and blunt end scissors, and, none of that other stuff can be anywhere nearby. It all has to be locked up if you have kids around. So the idea of a children's art studio was something that the educators on our staff really pushed for and wanted. With a collection on view, you can work in all kinds of new ways with teachers. So if any of you are teachers, you work very hard, you develop curricula that you can use year in and year out. They may evolve and develop, and they usually do, but you're less likely to integrate works of art into your curriculum if you're not really sure that they'll be available for you to work with your classroom over time. So the idea that we could have some of the most important works of art in Woodmere's collection on long-term view, like have a place to show the masterpieces of the collection, is a real game changer in terms of the way that we're able to work with teachers. Because now teachers, could make, long-term plans with, working with Woodmere's collection. You may know some of the Violet Oakley murals that we have at Woodmere. They're among our great masterpieces. And teachers want to work with those in terms of civic lessons, in terms of women's history, in terms of the history of Philadelphia. I mean, those are murals that intersect with so many important curricular subjects, American history as well. And yet, for a teacher to start working with that, it's like, well, I want to make sure I can bring my class this year, next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. So the idea that we could have places for the collection on a long-term basis changes the way we can work with teachers. There are more things that we're integrating into the garden that are integrated into the idea of a children's art class, like a garden that's built specially with the kinds of plants that you can, cut the sprouts and use them for basket weaving and stuff like that, flowers that you can make dye out of, and all those kinds of things, we're working on. And then we began to get out of our museum head as we were thinking about, okay, how, what is it that we're really doing here? And, what is the proposition that we're making to our community? Because we'd love to do all of this stuff, but we know that we're going to need funding in order to be able to do it all. So, there's Woodmere's expansion of its mission in art, the collection, and education, but then also, okay, here's this extraordinary National Register building, St. Michael's Hall, and if a developer were to buy it, it would certainly be demolished, because really there was no way to develop the site and keep the central core of the building. The building was so large and in so much need of upgrading that the only way you could really get, the only business model for a developer would be to I'm not even saying this in a bad way in terms of the way that developers have to think, but the only way to really get a business plan going on the site is to build single-family houses across it and use that center space as a kind of cul-de-sac or a rotary type of thing, so that the various houses that you would build on the site could use the central portion, where the house is, as your main egress, with one large kind of driveway going on and off of Germantown Avenue. You couldn't build, say 20 houses, which zoning would have allowed, and have 20 driveways coming off of the property. That would not be allowed. So any developer would have to focus the development inward, and that would mean demolishing the house. So we quickly became aware that the project that we were embarking on had to do with architectural preservation and saving a house that was really too big to be hauled away as rubble. And then finally, nature and green space. One of the things that we had already done on Charles Knox Smith Hall was really bring the museum outside and create experiences with art and nature. And again, we wanted to do that at Maguire Hall on a larger scale. We also realized that at Maguire Hall, the landscape had not been taken care of. There were gigantic trees that were dead and dying, all kinds of stormwater issues having to do with the fact that the hardscape had been built at a time when people in Philadelphia or institutions were not required to think about stormwater management. And so there were all kinds of decaying infrastructure issues across the green space. And the idea that we could not only preserve the building, but preserve the green space from development and improve the green space, improve the tree canopy, bring biodiversity into the region, again, became something that we could build into our vision. And then, take these 4 points: art, education, architectural preservation, and preservation of the green space. And, that's how we, went out there to raise the money in order to be able to renovate the building. Here's just to give you a sense of a little bit of architectural renderings and photographs of the building as it existed. I described the Children's Art Studio in my remarks a few minutes ago. This was originally the kitchen of the house, and the first time our educators saw it, they said, this is it. This is what we want for our Children's Art Studio, and that's our architectural rendering of actually pretty close to what it looks like today. I wanted to get to this and give a little bit of the history of the building that we're talking about. It exists largely because in the early 1850s, the woman you see, I guess on your left, my extreme right, Maria Louisa Trotter, that's a portrait of her by Thomas Sully in Woodmere's collection. Mrs. Trotter came from England. She was used to, a life where you maybe lived in London, but you had a gracious estate out in the countryside. And so she convinced her husband, whose name was William H. Trotter, that they needed to build a place out away from the city. And so she's the driving force behind the idea that this building at the corner of Sunset and Germantown Avenue would be constructed. She was born in London. She came to Philadelphia for her marriage. You can see that she's wearing a Queen Victoria hairdo that dates exactly to the 1850s when Maguire Hall was built as a Victorian residence. In the 1890s, the Trotters were finished with the family. They weren't finished with the family. The Trotters were finished with the house. They sold it to the Norris family briefly, and then the Norrises sold it to the Harrison family. And you see an image there of Alfred Craven Harrison, who was a sugar refiner, partners with the Havermeyer family, you might also know is a big sugar family of 19th century America, and the Alfred Craven Harrison sugar building downtown in Philadelphia on 15th Street, which is the location where the Oldenburg clothespin is now. He was working with the architects Cope and Stewardson to build the Harrison building downtown, an early office building demolished, in the 70s, I think. But he hired the same architects to expand his new country house. And in the 1890s, Alfred Craven Harrison transformed the interior of the house, built 2 large additions onto it. And that pretty much gives us the footprint of the building that we have today. And then I'm showing a portrait that Woodmere commissioned of our great friend and trustee, Franny Maguire, Francis M. Maguire. It's a portrait made by our friend Kassem Amoudi, who is an artist working in Philadelphia today. You can see his art at the Cerulean Gallery. Kassem was one of Franny's favorite teachers, an artist and artist relationship that was very close. And so we asked Kassem to make a beautiful portrait for us to hang in Maguire Hall next to Mrs. Trotter, the 2 ladies most responsible for the house. And I think, it's been in the newspapers and something we're very proud of. The Maguire Foundation and the Maguire family made a $10 million gift in order to name the building for their mother, Franny, who they knew loved Woodmere, was an artist, and would have loved to see Woodmere expand in this way. Maguires also lived in Chestnut Hill and loved the community, and they really saw the community preservation and the community growth dimension of this project that Woodmere was trying to make happen. So I would say these are the 3 people most important to the history of the building that we're talking about. And then another trio, the principal architects that we're working with in the transformation of what we now call Maguire Hall, Francis M. Maguire Hall. Matthew Baird is our design architect. Matthew grew up in Chestnut Hill, is a very distinguished artist. He came up through the Todd Williams and Billy Cien studio, started his own practice, and has been Woodmere's strategic planning architect actually for quite some time. So when we had this opportunity for Maguire Hall, it seemed just very natural that Matthew, who knew our needs, knew our collection, knew what Woodmere's thinking was in terms of how we wanted to grow, Matthew was the obvious choice for a lead design architect. And equally obvious to me, in my mind, was to work with Andrew Pogon for our landscape work. And I don't know if some of you know Andrew Pogon. They're a local firm here in Philadelphia, but they've been leaders in environmental approaches to landscape architecture at institutions. And they've done projects like, the revitalization of the Wissahickon, or that great, big, beautiful master plan of the Morris Arboretum. And, I was making that gesture of the the Paul Meyer Drive that brings you up to the top of the hill at the Arboretum. That was actually the idea of the gentleman you see on the screen, Jose Almañana, who is our chief landscape architect on the project. Andrew Pogon also did the sculpture and nature placement at Storm King Sculpture Garden in upstate New York. And so when it comes to like really thinking about how sculpture and nature can work together and responding to the two, I don't think you get any better than working with the Andrew Pogon folks. And then, you also need to have a local architect because, working with the city of Philadelphia is like more than a full-time job through a project like this. And so the wonderful Jeff Krieger, who lives in Chestnut Hill and has done so many important projects with the city of Philadelphia, again, was an easy choice for our on-the-ground local architecture. I'm showing, this is a rendering that the landscape architects and design architects made together of what the front of Maguire Hall will look like. There's a couple of things to point out here. One of the first things that we did was open up the porch, and I might just go back and show you this. You can see that the Sisters of St. Joseph had 25 women living in the convent at the height of its busyness as a place. And so they needed as much interior space as they could get. And so they enclosed the porch. And you can see they went to Home Depot and bought windows and plywood, and they got hammers and nails. And I kid you not. I mean, this is what you do. And they enclosed the porch and made the porches into interior spaces for themselves. And they took large spaces that had once been one large, beautiful parlor or bedroom and made them into smaller spaces. They needed 25 bedrooms. So even a 17,000 square foot house means that you have to, really chop up some of those spaces. And, for 25 people all waking up in the morning to go to work, because these are, the Sisters of St. Joseph are not cloistered. They're out working, every single one of them. So 25 people waking up in the morning, you need a lot of bathrooms. So a lot of what we've done on the interior is just restore the spaces to their original proportions. And on the exterior as well, we've taken a preservationist approach. And so the first thing you can see that we did, and it really makes a huge difference, is we took those enclosures off of the exterior and opened up the space. The accessibility ramp up onto the porch is this graceful curving arc that you see there that we hope people who are, and this is where Andrew Pogon is so good, because I said, I don't want one of those zigzag things that somebody who's in a wheelchair has to go a mile away to get to the front door. I want something that anybody will enjoy using. And so they designed this beautiful curving arc that follows, and I'll talk about this a little more, a beautiful fountain that we'd like to make in the center. The original sort of landscape kind of concept at a house like this is that, there would be a horse and carriage that would come up to the front door, drop off the people at the front door, and then the horse and the carriage would turn around, and there would have been a carriage house on the property that's long gone and, demolished, but barely a trace of it left. But, we wanted to keep this turnaround kind of idea, and we also have a terrific sculpture that we've always needed a fountain for. So I'll talk about that a little bit more. Here are some photographs. You can see, more about the porch itself. I think opening up this porch and exposing the columns makes the building more rational in the sense that you can now really see that Victorian core, that central cube sort of block that was built by the Trotters, and then you can really see where that addition comes on. So that's the 1890s addition that is moving south there. There's another addition in the back of the house moving eastward. But I think opening up the porch, you can really see the structure of the house in a way that you couldn't see it before. What's also so nice is, well, again, we have beautiful entertaining spaces on the porch. But then opening up the porch opens up views northward. And if you know anything about Chestnut Hill, Germantown Avenue, like Ridge Avenue, is built on a ridge. And a lot of the big houses, Laverock, Charles Knox Smith Hall, Woodmere's main building, they were all built on the top of that ridge to capture the view north to the White Marsh horizon. And what's been so nice about opening up that porch is that we reclaim that spectacular view. So opening up the porch has been really terrific. You can see that the columns have been stripped down to the bare wood. These columns, these are the original columns to the building. They were put up in 1855, and they've been painted every 10 or 15 years. So, we tried to kind of paint them without stripping them down, and there's just so much paint and so much mess, and you really lost all of the definition of the architectural detail at the top, that we decided, and this was me kicking and screaming about the expense of it, but we decided that we would strip down the columns to the wood so that when they are repainted, which is what they were supposed to be, they'll be crisp and beautiful. And then you see here on the bottom of the screen, this is the form for the fountain that we're creating in front of the house. And this is the sculpture that we have. She doesn't, you can't quite get a sense of her here, but the sculpture that we're building the fountain for is called Sweet Grapes by the artist Harriet Frischmuth, who was one of the great Gilded Age artists of America, part of the Philadelphia 10, and probably the most successful of the women artists who were in the Philadelphia 10 group. And we've always needed a fountain for her, so it's thrilling to be able to build something for her. And it's a figure it's a figure of a dancer, actually, and she's spinning in space. It's called Sweet Grapes, and you can maybe tell she's throwing over her shoulder a big grapevine that's dripping with grapes and stuff like that. And so she's spinning and dancing. And in my mind, and for sure, she's a response to Rodin's Eve, which you know from the facade of the Rodin Museum on the Parkway. Harriet Frischmuth was trained in Paris in Rodin's studio, and she was competitive with him. So there's no question in my mind that this is a woman's take on the beauty of a woman's figure spinning around in space in this spiraling form. And she's reacting to the Eve, who's similarly spiraling around and has a very similar pose. But of course, Eve is turning in on herself in shame. So I love the idea that we have this nice conversation between the Frischmuth sculpture, which is really beautiful. And the Rodin is very beautiful too. But it's two completely different spirits, and yet tied together through the history of the two artists. So very excited about that. Here you see more of the porch. This is the facade facing north. And again, you can see how the sisters had enclosed that porch and really made that kind of north sort of view of the building look like, I don't know, a train caboose had landed there. Whereas you just opened it up and again, you get this big, beautiful, elegant space. The real action in terms of any new construction is on the back of the building. We built a large deck, which is in place now, and the deck serves to connect a porch and then a space that is the dining room. And then also you see the elevator shaft for the building. There was no way to put an elevator inside the building and not destroy it. So, the logical solution was to put the elevator on the exterior of the building, and that's what you see there. The elevator shaft has a glass facade, again facing east there. And the elevator's doors are glass as well. So as you go up in the building, you'll be able to look out and get beautiful views as you go up into the building. And then inside the galleries, you'll be able to see out the elevator doors, and it'll bring light inside. So this is what the building looked like this weekend, and you can see that the elevator shaft is in place. And I had described how the elevator shaft connects into the dining room of the space. So this space right here, on the inside is the dining room. This is the second edition that was built by Alfred Craven Harrison. So you'll be able to get from the porch onto the deck, from the deck into the dining room. And we're going to use the dining room as the main event space in the building. So we can have a lecture there and then cocktails on the porch. Or we can have an event on the deck and then cocktails in the dining room. Or coffee or tea or whatever it is. This is the dining room. I wanted to point out that I'm guessing many of you know the Boyd Theater. The Friends of the Boyd, have been searching for places for their spectacular fixtures that were salvaged from the Boyd Theater before it was demolished. And so we've been able to get, a number of really great light fixtures. And as well, you see these beautiful sort of hand-carved mirrors that we're going to be installing in the dining room that also come from the Boyd. And here, I think you can't really see it here, but Cope and Stewartson, who were hired by the Harrison family to renovate the building, hired a woodworker named Edward Main to do the woodwork of the building. So I don't know if you know Edward Main. He was an immigrant from Belgium, came to Philadelphia, and quickly, kind of like the story of Samuel Yellen, who became, your ace level metal worker. Edward Main was like the great woodworker of Rose Valley and of many of the important historical buildings. And if you were building a big, gracious home in Chestnut Hill or the main line, this would be the person you would want to do your woodwork. And I had a slide here. I don't know if you can tell, but he has amazing fluidity in his carving. And so the quality of the carving of the woodwork is very beautiful in Maguire Hall. And here are two of my favorites of the little carved elements. And to me, you cannot see this, but to me, this guy has always reminded me of Jackie Gleason, and then next to him is Art Carney. So who knew? Another sculpture I wanted to point out on the exterior and leaping up from the retaining wall that holds up that deck, we are constructing a sculpture by the artist Ned Hoffman. Ned Hoffman was an artist in Philadelphia who had a bigger career outside of the city than in Philadelphia. But we had this wonderful maquette that was intended to be a public scale sculpture. Hoffman was a student of Walker Hancock. Walker Hancock, for the great Pennsylvania Railroad World War II Memorial in 30th Street Station, one of the great sculptures in Philadelphia. This too is a World War II memorial, the figure looking to the heavens and saying, how could the world do this to itself? So it'll be incredibly exciting, to have a male nude in the back and a female nude in the front of the building, but it's exciting for everyone. There will be lots of other sculpture across the grounds in terms of abstract sculpture. You may have noticed going up and down Germantown Avenue that Robin Friedenthal's On the Rocks has been installed right there at the corner of Hampton and Germantown. And this is an amazing sculpture that's a real shapeshifter as you walk around it. So from one angle, it looks like this. And here you can see it again. It came to us from Pennsauken, New Jersey. It was commissioned by Roger Wilco Discount Liquors. That's why it's called On the Rocks. And when the discount liquor store was expanding, they needed a new home for the sculpture. and Woodmere raised its hand. So it's exciting to have that there. And I show you there a rendering from Andropogon, and you can see, just the sensitivity to their response to color and texture and working with landscape to offset the beauty of a sculpture. And that's a sculpture called Syntax by the artist Steve Tobin. Rain gardens, I had said we'd be talking a little bit about stormwater management. A big part of the work that we're doing is a responsible landscape renovation that controls the stormwater that falls across the site. We have a giant engineered rain garden that collects all the water that falls onto the roof, ends up in the rain garden, and there are layers of retentive materials that are designed like a sponge to suck water down into the earth. And of course, we're going to have a beautiful sculpture at the head of the rain garden in Leon Satarchik's figure that you see there. And I thought I would start bringing people inside and start going a little more quickly. This is the entrance hall to Maguire Hall. That's a photograph that I took today. And this is an architect's rendering. You can see how the work is coming along. Another beautiful fixture from the Boyd Theater there. Galleries for contemporary art, beautiful large parlors with excellent light that we'll be able to use to showcase Woodmere's collection of contemporary art. We're going to dedicate the entire first floor of the building, 5 galleries, to the work of the living artists of Philadelphia. And then as you go up and through the building, we'll go back in time to 20th century Philadelphia. But we're going to use the main floor with the tallest ceilings and the largest spaces for the work of Philadelphia's living artists, which seems like the right thing to do. And when we conceive of contemporary art in Philadelphia as an inclusive conversation from artists, some of whom are from families that have lived in Philadelphia for generations and generations, like Ann Minnick, whose Bone Boat you see down there, and then other artists, like Ed Bingley or Henry Bermudez, who come from first generation or are immigrants themselves to Philadelphia. I promised a little bit of remark about Violet Oakley and the murals from the Yarnall House. We're building a gallery that's purpose-built for the Yarnall House murals, shaping the walls exactly the way Violet Oakley had wanted them, so that her big lunettes are in these large arching spaces with purpose-built locations for the octagon shapes and those shield shapes in sort of those corners. And then we're also going to build a lightbox version of the oculus that was originally built for the ceiling, the original of which was destroyed, although Violet Oakley's cartoon, her plan for it that she gave to the glass fabricator is in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So we can use that as the basis to make a light, it's a light box with a transparency on it. It's nothing high tech, but it'll give a sense of how Violet Oakley intended those murals to work, not only in terms of just the relationship between the light in the ceiling and the murals, but the story begins in the ceiling. And so, in the center there is an allegorical figure of destiny or fate or something like that. And this figure is looking down onto the earth and saying, where in this planet, where in the world can I find wisdom? The title of the works is Building the House of Wisdom. And so she asks this question above, and then the murals proceed to answer the question, because you find wisdom in great literature. You find wisdom by learning a musical instrument, the discipline that requires. You find wisdom in the emotions that art offers. You find wisdom by traveling with your family and encountering other places. You find wisdom in science. You find wisdom in mythology, and and this is what plays out in the course of the murals. This is a gallery and study center for women artists. So Violet Oakley is deeply associated with Woodmere, as well as her whole circle of artist friends, the Red Rose Girls, and so we'll have a gallery to show their work, which is incredibly exciting. Woodmere has, I would say, the great collection of American Impressionism of Philadelphia. And again, this is something that nobody knows. People associate Impressionism in Philadelphia with the Woodmere Museum, and have been led to believe that it's a Bucks County phenomenon, which it's not. All of this is really about the relationship between Philadelphia and Paris in the late 19th and early 20th century, and artists who went to Paris and lived in these beautiful buildings and encountered Cézanne and Renoir and Monet. And so we'll have a gallery dedicated to Impressionism of Philadelphia, which is an incredibly important story to the development of American art. We will have a gallery dedicated to configurations of realism in 20th century Philadelphia, which is the main story of modernism in Philadelphia. Abstraction is an offshoot from the main road of the arts in 20th century Philadelphia, which is figurative, which is based on the Academy, which is inspired by the example of Thomas Eakins, and how do you make meaningful the things that you see with your own eyes. And so artists who go to the local swimming pool and paint it, or paint their friends and so forth. So we'll have a gallery for what I would say is the largest part of Woodmere's 20th century collection. But of course we won't ignore modernism, and we'll have a gallery dedicated to Arthur Carles and his circle. Arthur Carles is Philadelphia's great modernist, one of the artists who went from the United States to Paris in the early decades of the 20th century, participated in the activities of the avant-garde there, was friends with Picasso and Matisse and everybody, and came back and is one of Philadelphia's great teachers, and created a culture of modernism in Philadelphia that is very different from the modernism that you get in New York. So if Cubism in New York is analytic Cubism and gray and beige, and in Philadelphia, Cubism is bright and colorful, and it really is a very different modernism that evolves in Philadelphia, and largely because of Arthur Carles. And we have over 300 works by Arthur Carles at Woodmere, and again, nobody even knows that. So it's going to be incredibly exciting to have this gallery for Carles. For mid-century painting in Philadelphia, we will also have a gallery for that. It's another very large part of our collection. And then something I've always wanted, the history of the jewelry arts in Philadelphia. So Philadelphia, being an English city, had great silversmiths in the 18th century. This is what you see when you go to the Philadelphia Museum of Art and look in their new early American galleries, the extraordinary silver work that comes to Philadelphia from England, because we're the second city of the British Empire for a very long time. And so all the great silver shops of London set up shop in Philadelphia. And so, whereas New York is Dutch and they're drinking out of beer steins and it's all pewter, Philadelphia has the Philadelphia has the refinement of the best silversmithing on the planet. And in the course of the 19th century, that parlays into a culture of jewelry making. And so companies like Caldwell and Bailey, Banks and Biddle, who you may know, who are among the great jewelry makers of the 19th century, really start out as tableware companies making colonial era tablewares for the British citizens of Philadelphia. In the course of the 19th century, they start making jewelry, and the science of Philadelphia channels into Philadelphia becoming a great center for jewelry making. You guys are about art and science. All kinds of electroplating was developed in Philadelphia. Electroplating with gold was developed at Temple University. And all of this translates into an absolutely fascinating history of the jewelry arts. The jewelry arts are also something that dazzles the public, and no other museum in the city is doing anything about jewelry. So we will have 3 galleries dedicated to the history of the jewelry arts of the city at Maguire Hall, and I'm very excited about that. And you can see works by contemporary jewelry makers, works by historical. This is a Caldwell bow from the 1930s. Caldwell owned jewelry, Art Deco jewelry in the 1930s. This is a sapphire, diamond, platinum, and pearl bow. And you can see the extraordinary workmanship of Caldwell just in the way that the diamonds and even the pearls are graded and twisted so that you get the illusion of a 3-dimensional bow that's been tied the way you tie a bow, but they're doing it on an almost flat surface and working with stones and cutting the diamonds and cutting the stones to give the illusion of a 3-dimensional bow form. And this is something that Caldwell could do that Tiffany could not, really. And you can see down there, we're going to have a wall of rings and, these hands coming out of the wall and wearing or holding the rings. And that's a ring made by a contemporary jewelry artist in Philadelphia who comes from Ghana and came to Philadelphia to study at Temple University and, now has a successful career, but he's using Adinkra symbols from ancient Ghana to make jewelry, electroplating gold at Tyler on the same machines where electroplating with gold was invented. And he's digital printing these ancient Ghanaian forms and then having them cast into gold. It's an absolutely fascinating story. Here I'm showing a necklace by a man named Doug Bucci, who's the head of the metalsmithing and jewelry department at Tyler. And what Doug has done that's amazing is he figured out how a digital printer could print 2 intertwined links. Everybody knew how to make a link and a link, cut them, stretch them, and put them together like that. What Doug figured out was how to trick the printer into making 2 links that are intertwined. And that's what he did. And that's the kind of inventive spirit that we have in Philadelphia that has changed the jewelry making world, again, of the whole planet. And so Theophilus Anor, who's the student from Ghana, I forgot to say his name before, came to Philadelphia from Ghana because he wanted to work with Doug Bucci and learn the creative spirit of, how do you actually work with digital printing to make beautiful jewelry. The top floor of the building will be our Von Hess Foundation Study Center and Gallery for prints, drawings, and photographs, works on paper. Woodmere's collection, like most art museums, is 75% works on paper. We will set up flat files under the eaves of the roof line going around 3 sides of the building, and then have a gallery and workspaces so that visiting curators or scholars or other people with projects, a lot of movie makers want access to Violet Oakley's stuff, can have places where they can have access to the archives and the largest part of Woodmere's collection. So I'm excited about the Works on Paper Gallery. Our bathrooms, I thought I would show off a little bit. One of my favorite artists in Philadelphia is an artist named Edna Andrade, who I knew a little bit. That's a print in Woodmere's collection. Edna imagined it could be made into wallpaper, and so voila, we did that. We're working with this newfangled kind of vinyl surfacing for bathrooms that you can wash with straight bleach, and it doesn't get hurt, so we'll have fun with that. And then finally, one of the fun things about working on a construction site is all the doodles and things that the construction workers write on the walls. And so Big Perm, you can see over here, has a perm of hair, but it's also sperm, obviously. There's Woody Woodpecker, and then you cannot read it there, but I'll read what it says in the middle. So it says, "I should have been a taper," which of course is I should have been a contender. But right now with the building under the construction and sheetrock going up, so carpenters put up the sheetrock, and then the tapers and plasterers come in over. It's two completely different units. So somebody felt I should have been a taper, not a carpenter. So I think that's the end of my presentation. I'm glad to take questions.
Yes, please.
Yeah.